Welcome to Defender Fridays, your weekly rendezvous with the forefront of information security. I am not Eric Capuano. I am Matt Bromley, but I am still part of the same Lima Charlie team, and it is really excited to be here with you all. I'm going to be honest with you. One of the things that I've loved about this particular show is the chance that we get to get on here with folks who do some amazing, awesome stuff. We're going to dive deep into information security, talk to seasoned professionals, get actionable advice. But I want to issue one little blanket statement for everyone out there who's listening to this. Everyone's face who you see right now was at one point in time, and most of us still are, beginners in this field as well. So if you're learning how to do all this stuff and you're like, oh my gosh, these guys have probably forgotten more than I'll ever know, that's not the focus. The focus is we are all learning. Eric, I sent a quote to you earlier this week. We were having a discussion about some things. A true master recognizes that they are always a student, and we are all students of information security. With that said, we've got an awesome guest on today. David Burkett, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great, man. How are you?
Fantastic would be an understatement of how well I'm doing right now. It is, David, where are you at in the world geographically?
I'm actually in South Carolina.
Okay, so you've been getting some good weather lately?
Yeah, actually, it's been a little chilly, but I guess nothing to complain about compared to some places.
I've had 70s all week, so I'm happy. The sun is right there for anyone who's curious. I'm looking that way, and it's been absolutely beautiful. David, you're going to be our primary guest today. Here's the thing, sir. You have already started by throwing, and for those of you who don't know, you're going to have to go find it now. David already threw out a hint, a clue as to what he was going to be focused on today. But David, I'd love it if you'd introduce yourself to the rest of the class today. Yeah. Let us know who you are, what's going on.
Yeah, so my name is David Burkett. I'm the founder of Signalblur Cyber Threat Intel. Have done a few things. I've built a few security monitoring programs now, 2 of them for MDR programs from the ground up. Helped co-author a white paper on doing detection as code, which was a bunch of fun a few years back. Done a whole lot of stuff. I think my biggest achievement, the one I'm most proud of, was I was a SOC manager for a security program that won a Cogswell Award from the Defense Counterintelligence Agency. That was
dang.
Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Dude, that is that's no easy thing to just lob out there. Kind of like, oh yeah, the other day I went to pick up the newspaper, and by the way, I also ran this program that won this amazing award. That's pretty awesome. Can you just do me a favor? Give me like 10 seconds on exactly what that is for those of us in the crowd who might not know what that award means.
Yeah, so the Cogswell Award is an award that is given out once a year by the Defense Counterintelligence Agency, and what it does is it recognizes or organizations that are like the top 1% of all cleared cybersecurity facilities. So like regarding security clearances, so your top secret SCI type facilities.
Awesome, man. Well, first off, congrats on that, because that's first off, like, that's an awesome little bullet I'd throw in there. But I want to jump right to the heart of the matter, David, because you threw out earlier today. Now let's pause for a moment. Folks, for anyone who's like, wow, Matt and David are like really comfortable here. This is pretty interesting. David's been a longtime friend of the Lima Charlie team. He's been around and built a whole bunch of different things. And David is also, in a little bit of a selfless plug here, David's also an active contributor to our Intel channel, which itself feeds our Cyber Defenders podcast, which I highly recommend you check that out too. So first off, sir, thank you for your contributions there. However, this morning, approximately 2 hours and 31 minutes ago, you threw a little query into a channel that said, I'll be talking about this thing. And then you went and you gave us a template query, including the word evil in there, because adversaries name all their malware evil. So therefore, it's really easy to find. But I'm going to need you to expand upon this a little bit. And let's go down the road of detection engineering, David, for the next 25 minutes, because I want to see how much we can tease out of this here. I think you've got some secrets to share with us.
Yeah. So, well, I think I titled this one, it's only detection engineering if it's from the baselining region of whatever. I don't remember. I'd been trying
detection engineering is just sparkling baselining.
Yeah, there you go. I've been trying to think of a good way to kind of put that completely together. But
I want to
I've been
thank you
really
for that.
working on ways to come up with making detection engineering a lot more approachable, because I don't think it has to be as scary as it can maybe seem whenever you maybe follow some people on Twitter or whatnot, and they're throwing out all of these cool, like complex detection like queries and stuff. It's not the only way that it has to be done. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about baselining. And one of the queries that I threw out in the announcement channel, I think I tagged it to the announcement of this today's recording, was a way to kind of get a list of all of the processes using the Lima Charlie query language on a specific host through a specific time frame. And one of the things that you could do with that is, of course, baseline what processes are actually on a host and look for deviations from that. So yeah, that's kind of where that goes. The biggest piece, though, that I want to emphasize is baselining is a really powerful just detector in general. Something that I find often that some of the most I guess some of the best detectors are often the simplest. That often means it's because they're pretty broad.
Too true.
Yeah, it often means it's because they're pretty broad, but it doesn't have to be complex. So, for example, if you look for things like what destination ports your servers are communicating over, the amount of malware I see that communicates over like a hard-coded, odd-numbered, high-level destination port is pretty substantial. So it's just little things like that are really simple queries that you can do and make for really simple rules. And I think it's something that once you get the idea and get the kind of the logic of building those type of queries to figure out how to baseline things, you'll gradually kind of build your way into detection engineering as you're getting more and more comfortable, because you're going to be getting more and more specific the more you do it with what you're baselining. So it's I think it's one of those things that's a good way to kind of ease into the field.
Hey,
yeah,
David,
go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, so I want to kind of just regurgitate what you're saying in a slightly different way. I'm curious if you would agree. It's almost like it's a necessary step in the evolution of a detection engineer or a threat hunter to say, look, you cannot excel at finding needles in a haystack unless you have a very good understanding of haystacks, right? You got to know what hay looks like. You got to know that hay is also flammable. And you got to know that, hey, there's some tricks that say it would be a lot easier to find this needle if I learned how to burn away some of this hay, right? So really, to say it simply, you've got to know your environment, the good parts, the noisy parts, the weird parts. You've got to know all those little facets of it before you're ever going to find threat actors. Am I right?
Yeah, exactly. That's 100% it. And there's a few places that you can kind of even start off with if you're looking at things like host baselining. So getting started with your logins, those are typically a really good place to start baselining in your environment. So something that I like to kind of tell people whenever I'm talking about this is I commonly see two kind of detectors for maldocs. You'll see some that are just like looking for Microsoft Word spawning PowerShell, whatever. And maybe a few other kind of scripting languages. And then you'll occasionally run across organizations that have these huge list of processes like nav inject and some that you don't really typically see. I think that you don't need to really make it that complicated. So this gets more difficult the larger you scale, of course, but for most organizations, just looking at what your child processes are, even if it's just maybe only ever nothing for like Excel and Word, but just getting an idea of what those are and just doing a simple not, and then that way you don't have to worry about adding new processes, new things like that as they're discovered. It's almost like going to an allow list method versus a deny list whenever you're doing your
David, there's so much to unpack in this that there's like a couple threads I want to go down. The first one is I want to really expand upon what you just said, but we're going to come back to that. I want to back up to the term baselining, to the idea of baselining for folks out there just getting into this. And I'm going to look for hopefully an agreement from David on this one. Baselining and the query that he threw out there is really just understanding what it looks like in your environment at any given point in time, right? Baselining is from a host perspective, it is understanding what processes are running right now throughout the day. What is, and I'm going to borrow this term, but it's a good term to use, and I don't mind borrowing it. Hopefully everyone here is going to smile. You know where I'm borrowing it from. What does normal look like? Right? You can lead up where I'm going with my next reference here. Okay. That's baselining type number one. What does my environment look like? That's the one that is unique to you, unique to your organization. Some of y'all, industry, sector, geography, presence of on-prem cloud, whether there's a gold image or not, VM, physical, it's going to change based on what's there, right? Baselining item one is unique. Baselining item two, in my opinion, is going to be where and how things do what they do. And that's going to be a little more universal. So there's a really great reference out there that I always use to help explain baselining. It's the Sans Blue poster. Everyone's hopefully got an idea of what that one is. The reason I mention this one is because that one baselines, what does Windows look like when it boots up? Here's the things that happen. So baseline category two is there are things that are standard pretty much around the world, depending on operating system version, that can also be used as a form of a baseline, right? Now, of course, there might be tweaks here and there, but those tweaks would be reflected in your own personal baseline as well. So for example, like, we use, Microsoft Defender, that business unit uses Semantic and that business unit uses Trend Micro. Therefore, our boot up baseline looks a little bit different. It's like, yeah, but there's a large enough population that's there. Dave, any other kind of baselines? Or those are primary two? I think those are the two that you see detection rules written against the most.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate. That's yeah. I'd say the same thing.
And then the next step then becomes, and this is where I think I don't want to say it's trivial. Like I'm really hesitant to say it's trivial, but I feel like when you have a baseline, understanding whether something is malicious or not, that decision time, that confidence level is so high. Because it's like, oh my God, Word is spawning PowerShell. Is that normal? Well, I don't know. Let's go download a copy of the Word document. Let's go see what it does. Let's reverse engineer the script. Or let's just go to our baseline and be like, in the past year, has this ever happened? No. Okay. Statistically, and this is not to nerd out on everybody here, but there's a very good term here called least frequency of occurrence, which is very critical when it gets to baselining. This is where you're like, no, this thing doesn't happen. Statistically, it's an anomaly. It's not evil yet, but statistically, it's an anomaly. And I think, David, you were going down the road of pinpointing, like, understanding whether or not that's normal. Because let me just ask you: is an Excel macro bad?
No, it's not.
No, not at all. Right? Microsoft even kept macros in there because someone somewhere paid enough money to say, "Hey, this thing is useful. We need to use it." Right? We won't comment on which department or which defense that is. But that being said, we'll just go back and just say that it was a thing that is used by legitimate businesses. Right? The idea of WinWord calling PowerShell.exe may scare the lights out of some of us, but for some folks, it's actually a legitimate business process and knowing whether or not that's there. So I love the fact that you're starting out with baselining this. I want you to expand a little bit more though. You talked about baselining network connections. Dude, I feel like that's just a spaghetti plate that we're just jumping into.
Yeah. So there's a few that are more high value than others, and it really, really, really depends on like your environment and how big you are. So one of the things that I find it really changes with scale is just how baselining is going to work. Obviously, just because your environment becomes so large and dynamic, it can be hard to create any sort of baseline, and there's just so much difference in the amount of stuff that you're doing. But for most organizations that aren't of some sort of gigantic size, there are a lot of places that you can start that don't have a lot of deviation. So for example, looking at your server traffic itself, your servers are probably not going to communicate over a bunch of different, destination ports unless there's something that's changed on them for some reason. And you should hopefully either know about that change. Maybe it's some new tool or whatever. But it's typically, it's just such a strong way to catch, bad. And then of course, other kind of things like looking at your domain controllers, there's just a few high value kind of targets that you can really hit. Web servers, anything public facing, really.
Yeah, I would. I'm gonna take all of David's concepts and then actually bridge a gap outside of security. It's very security related, but it's also something that a lot of folks don't think of. And David, guess what else baselining does for you? It also starts to build asset inventory lists for you. So like baselining really quickly jumps from, oh, here's all the stuff running to, oh, wait a second, here's all the systems that reported back running processes and network connections. Now I've got a little bit of an inventory building. And then I often think in terms of how quickly can a security team start to answer a question. It's always like one of the metrics that I like to use when I talk about why do a thing. It's like, do we really need to baseline our stuff? It's like, well, okay, cool. Let's go another route, right? The security test is always, we need to collect random XYZ log from random application. And someone's like, do you collect DNS queries? And it's like, no, we don't. It's like, cool. Let's get the basics and then we'll talk about the fancy stuff, right? Let's learn to drive a Honda before you want to buy a Ferrari. That being said, I feel like as folks go through and start to, kind of build some of these things out, you'll collect all these processes, collect all this network data. And then, management comes down the line and is like, hey guys, I just read about this really bad RDP vulnerability. Are we running RDP in our environment? Like, is it open? Can we talk about this privately? And guess what? What does the security team do when that question comes up? Anybody know? Anyone ever been through that rat race? Have to answer that question. Are we running RDP? David, what's the fastest way to answer that question? There's one really quick way to get there.
You check your baseline for your networks.
See what I mean? Look how fast now you're able to answer questions is looking at that baseline.
Threat hunting? Right.
Now, well, hold on. Now we're talking about baseline, sparkling baselining, not threat hunting. All right.
So one other thing too, turning these baselines into detections doesn't have to be difficult, like I was saying. So you just looking for, any event that's not, maybe these two ports that I know we communicate over. So maybe it's like 53 and 443 or something like that. And then if you have any network connection that makes a communication out on that port, now you've got an alert. So it can really be just that simple. And I just can't overstate, like, just because it's simple doesn't mean it's not a strong detector. I think you might have a few more false positives, but you'll learn to be able to knock those out ahead of time, just as you, get used to baselining your environment.
There's some absolute magic in this, and let me give an example. And I'm going to loosely paraphrase the historical event. I don't remember specifics. Somebody might, but Google had uncovered a microchip processor that had put components in their servers that were in their data centers. Google had discovered that these chips, these out-of-band like management chips, were basically communicating out. They were, beaconing out, phoning home, or what have you. And imagine the scale of Google's data centers. Imagine the chattiness of systems and everything that it runs in this data center. And Google was able to pick up, instantly this very infrequent beacon from this out-of-band chip. And imagine there's no magic in that. It's that their baselines were so incredibly tight. They know exactly what chatter happens and therefore doesn't happen in their environments. And it was just basically an alert on a deviation from a baseline. So if this can be done at the scale of Google and the massive complexities of their data centers, right? It just speaks to the effectiveness of this approach, right? It's not the sexy thing. It's not Intel based, you're not hunting IOCs. No, you're simply embracing knowing your own environment so well that you can write a detection that just says, hey, if something changes, if something other than these normal things happens, we should probably know about it. And yes, to David's point, it could be false positive. It could be, but you can get a tighter and tighter grip on this. And pretty soon you're the one catching the next solar winds before the rest of the world knows that it's happening. Right. And so I think it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And what you are looking at whenever you're looking at these like Sigma rules, at the end of the day, it's just baselined processes with pre-tuned out what's bad. So as you scale and your infrastructure, you get larger and larger as an organization. That's when that baselining kind of role or I guess, position really transforms more into that detection kind of engineering role, because now you're having to write rules that take into some of the more complex things into account, where you don't necessarily need to do that at a smaller organization. Same thing with MSPs. It can be difficult for an MSP to go through and baseline client networks, just because it's hard to keep up with what's normal, because they don't like to keep you in the loop of whenever they make changes. And then B, just because you might have a ton of clients, and then having someone that can keep up with all of the different baselines, that it gets confusing quick. So it's also a really powerful way to, if you have like an MDR vendor, to kind of bridge some of those maybe visibility gaps you might be concerned about.
Yeah, that's an important one you brought up, I think, as well as a consideration for this, is just it can get to an unwieldy data size. I don't want to say quickly, but scale is definitely going to be an issue here, because you are essentially, you're dumping at its simplest form process lists times number of endpoints. And depending on how you're receiving, cataloging, collating, correlating, all that stuff, it might be a pretty significant undertaking. I would still contend, though, that first off, we don't let anything, like we don't let data stop us from finding evil, right? That's no longer a concern in 2024. In fact, I would contend that if these days someone is like, I don't have a place to store this data, I'd be like, I can get you a 4 terabyte hard drive for like $30. You got to wipe it first. It'll probably have someone's old auction data on it, but anyways, you can still get one, So there's that, number one. Number two, the ability to go through and parse and cut this stuff, there's a handful of tools out there that allow you to do this. So for anyone who's hearing this and you're like, oh man, I wish I had the same tech stack David, Matt, and Eric do, I'm going to fight back and say you have a command line. And you'd be surprised just how much baselining can be done with awk-sed, grep, and cut and whatnot. So there's always an easy place to start as you go through this here. David, I got a question for you. It's kind of come up as we've been talking about this. Is baselining the introduction to detection engineering, or is it itself a form of detection engineering?
I'd say it's a little of both. I think that it's because it's so powerful, especially for smaller organizations that maybe don't have a super dynamic environment. It's a good way to kind of get an idea of how to write your detection logic. But I don't think it necessarily is you have to, do baselining to become a detection engineer type of thing. But it definitely is a technique, I would say, that detection engineers use. And just to put it out there, even at scale, there's a lot of things that you can look at that really don't deviate all that much. So even if you have these massive environments, just things like, especially things that are really critical, the things that are king to that have the keys to your kingdom, per se, they typically don't have a lot of changes to them. So it's really easy to find deviation.
I feel like that is a super important point, which is sometimes it's not about the size of the environment that you're looking to baseline as the type, right? I will take any day like a production environment in Kubernetes somewhere that's like running some product with like 10,000 nodes, right? Like 100,000 CPUs or whatever it is, compared to like 100 workstations that are all running local admin for some people that have to, like talk to random customers like any day. And it's cool because you also get more bang for your buck in those environments, right? Because like, I think it was Eric or Matt that was talking about like the Google thing. And like, that's the perfect example of it, right? If you can apply this to like a really simple environment, amazing stuff.
Yep.
I would also contend that I talked earlier about it being a form of asset management. There's a quick win here, folks. I don't know. I think it was yesterday, but it could have been a year ago. I'm not sure which time frame is going to meld together here. But there was a period where someone was like, "Hey, could we like use detection rules not to find evil, but to identify something running somewhere so I could classify what that system is," right? Now there's some easy thought wins there, right? If you see SQL, I think it's SQL srvr.exe running. I don't want to be the spoiler here, spoiler alert, but that's a Microsoft SQL server, right? The flip side is if you see like IIS or Apache or Tomcat or I apologize for this one, but java.exe or javaw.exe, then you already know what's coming. But we'll leave that off to the side. But there's one way to go about that. David, you hit on a really good point though, which is understanding the system or systems that you're baselining to. What does the knowledge of a system do to your detection? So, and I'll give you an example. Here's a use case for you just to think about this one. WinWord.exe spawns PowerShell.exe. All right, straightforward. Yeah, we could probably look at this thing. Based on your baselining, you've got two alerts. Based on your baselining, one of them is a laptop, the other one's a domain controller. How does that change your approach? Or how should it?
Yeah, so if I saw WinWord spawning PowerShell on a domain controller, I would be concerned. So
for how many reasons? Can you count them on two hands?
So I think if are you trying to say, like, if I understand the underlying environment and its purpose, it can be easier to build potentially a baselines. It'll help you understand like the type of software. I don't know that I follow the question. Apologies. Yeah,
no worries. My thought was, if you go through in baselining, in addition to like understanding the environment, you'll also be able to pinpoint what oh, this thing's running NTDS. This is likely a domain controller. This thing's a web server. So you can, as part of baselining, also get insight into what systems do. And my thought there was you could use that knowledge to then also profile systems and then use that to help gauge severity in your detections too. And I guess the point here is, I haven't changed the exercise. We're still collecting the same amount of data, but we can parse it and tease out little details that can then let me say, all right, here's my detection rule based on my baselining that I've got there. I'm going to use that same baseline data to ramp this thing up a little bit and say, if it's in this group of systems, right, which are also running. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So something that you can do, one of my favorite Lima Charlie features is the fact that you can dynamically tag endpoints when you see certain things happen. So for example, if I see a certain process, like you mentioned, I could tag it as maybe a host endpoint or maybe a web server, something to that effect, based on the type of processes. And then using that, you can have essentially a way to dynamically identify systems in your environment, and you could build detections based on those tags, using the tags as what you're setting for your baseline. So for example, maybe I want to query all of my endpoints that are tagged web server. You can now potentially do that if you have a DNR rule that's looking for something like IIS.exe or Nginx or Caddy or one of the other web server processes, whichever ones you're likely to use. And it'll make your baselining, the baselining of your environment, just a lot more powerful, and it'll also help keep it a little more accurate and up to date. So as things change, if you're not kept in the loop, maybe some networks get decommissioned or a new network gets stood up that you don't have a rule for. This could be a way to kind of dynamically generate that.
Absolutely. I love that, man. That's a great idea. I think it's another way for folks, again, we started out the past almost 30 minutes has been a conversation on the same data set. We haven't deviated from a single data set, which is that baseline data set, scope, scale, whatever. But it's that idea of just capturing some of that basic information. And then how can I tease little details out of that to not only influence maybe the way I write detections, but also the severity with which I take them, and lots of avenues to go there. David, it's been great having you on here. I think we have about a minute left or so. Eric, what you got?
Yeah. I was just going to throw out one quick reminder, folks. Hey, so would absolutely love to see more of your faces on this call. So please, if you're willing to join and be on as a panelist, which is basically just the folks you see with their cameras on. I dropped a link there in the chat. The same link is also in our Slack, which you should absolutely join, because that's where you're going to see David dropping fire, intel and detections into Slack on almost a daily basis. But do please fill out that form. If you've already have filled out the form and therefore you're joining as a panelist, just keep in mind that the panelist link is the one you want to use moving forward, because you'll have two. You'll have your old invite and then you'll have your panelist invite. Just be sure you're using your panelist invite to join so that you come in as a panelist, which simply gives you the ability to turn on your camera and come off mute if you'd like. Because as you see, this is a lot more fun when we all start to interact and just have a free flowing kind of dialogue. And that's the way we want to keep running Defender Fridays. But as Matt said, David, thank you so much for joining us today. Folks, next week, we've got another really awesome guest lined up, Haroon Mir of Thinks Canary. If you don't already know, well, you should. I'll just say that.
Now you know.
Thinks is kind of like, the hottest in the space as far as deception technology. So it's going to be really awesome to hear from him. So we will see you all same time, same place next week. Have a fantastic rest of your Friday and a really awesome weekend. Take care.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, David.